Zero telemetry data exists to support the claim that Ferrari was sandbagging at the Dutch Grand Prix, yet Lewis Hamilton finished exactly 7.55 seconds behind Lando Norris in a race where he explicitly told his team on lap 42 that he was quicker than Charles Leclerc with better tires. That specific timestamp and radio message are the only hard numbers we actually have from Zandvoort, and they point directly to a chaotic internal strategy dispute rather than any deliberate manipulation of pace or hidden engine modes. The sensational idea that the Scuderia was hiding performance in Selector 10J completely collapses when you look at the verified timeline of events, because every available source confirms the team was desperately trying to execute a driver swap to maximize Hamilton's result, not suppress it. But if they were truly trying to help him fight for a podium against the Mercedes-powered cars, why did their own execution cost him the exact margin he needed to beat George Russell on countback in the championship standings? That is the tension hanging over Maranello right now, because the gap between what Ferrari intended to do and what actually happened on track is where this entire story lives. We know Hamilton qualified P5 and Leclerc P6 on Saturday, and we know Hamilton had called Ferrari's qualifying trim deficit versus Mercedes nuts, while simultaneously predicting that their race pace would be superior once the fuel loads equalized. He believed the car was better for the race, and the pre-race setup changes had reportedly flipped the car on its head to suit his driving style specifically. So when he found himself stuck behind his teammate on better rubber in the middle of the Grand Prix, the expectation was a clean, immediate swap to unleash that predicted pace advantage. Instead, the pit wall hesitated. Leclerc held position for at least one extra lap despite his crew already waiting in the lane, and the resulting delay triggered a chain reaction of frustration that played out over the team radio for everyone to hear. This wasn't a case of a team managing a delicate power unit or conserving tires for a later stint. It was a breakdown in real-time decision-making that left their 7-time world champion screaming into his microphone while precious tenths evaporated. The narrative of sandbagging implies a calculated, premeditated deception, but what actually unfolded at Zandvoort looks far more like a team struggling to manage two competitive drivers under pressure. Yet even as we dismiss the conspiracy theories, the underlying question remains unanswered by any public sector times or degradation curves. If there was no artificial pace cap, and if Hamilton genuinely had the speed to pass, why couldn't Ferrari convert that raw potential into a podium finish when it mattered most? The answer isn't buried in secret telemetry files or hidden ECU maps, but in the messy human reality of a 4-second pit stop and a series of radio exchanges that revealed just how fragile the trust between driver and pit wall had become in that critical window. We have to separate the internet noise from the documented facts to understand what really happened, because the truth about Ferrari's Dutch GP weekend is far more complicated and far more consequential for the 2026 title fight than any clickbait headline could ever capture. Multiple independent outlets including Crash, Net, and GP Blog cross-referenced the incident and consistently framed it as an internal strategy dispute, not a performance suppression scandal. This distinction matters because sandbagging requires intent to deceive, whereas the Zandvoort evidence shows a team making real-time calls under extreme pressure. Ferrari's pit wall was actively attempting to optimize Hamilton's track position, even if the execution proved disastrously slow. The very act of ordering Leclerc to pit proves they weren't protecting his position at Hamilton's expense. They were trying to unlock the pace advantage Hamilton had been demanding since lap 42. Strategy failed, trust fractured, pace vanished. Consider the sheer volume of communication required to manage that swap. The team didn't ignore Hamilton's request, they acted on it, instructing Leclerc to box so Hamilton could be released into clean air. That is the opposite of hiding performance. It is an acknowledgement that one car has superior race pace and should be prioritized for the benefit of the Constructors' Championship standing. If Ferrari were truly sandbagging in Selector 10J or any other engine mode, they would have simply told Hamilton to hold station behind Leclerc and manage his tires. They wouldn't have risked the chaos of a mid-race driver swap that ultimately cost them time against both Mercedes and McLaren. The fact that they attempted the maneuver at all demonstrates a commitment to maximizing their best available result, however clumsy the implementation turned out to be. Let's look at the pre-race context again to reinforce this point. Hamilton himself stated before lights out that he expected Ferrari's race pace to be better than qualifying suggested, specifically noting the car felt improved after setup changes. He wasn't complaining about a lack of power or a restricted engine map. He was expressing confidence in the package's long-run potential. That confidence was based on tangible feedback from practice sessions, not wishful thinking. When the driver believes the car is capable of fighting for podiums, and the team subsequently makes strategic decisions aimed at achieving that goal, the narrative of deliberate underperformance becomes logically incoherent. You don't sandbag when you believe you can win. You push, you adapt, and sometimes, as happened at Zandvoort, you make mistakes that hurt more than any artificial limitation ever could. So where does that leave the telemetry conspiracy theories right now, completely unsupported by the documented sequence of events? Every verified radio transmission, every reported pit stop duration, and every post-race quote aligns with a team struggling to execute a complex strategy, not one manipulating data to hide true pace. The 4-second stationary time during Leclerc's delayed stop wasn't a calculated delay to mask performance. It was a mechanical and human error compounded by the initial hesitation to follow orders. Those are the hallmarks of operational stress, not strategic deception. And yet, the question of why Ferrari couldn't ultimately match Mercedes' raw Sunday pace remains genuinely unresolved by the available data, which brings us back to the gap between intention and outcome that defines this entire weekend. Picture this for a second. You are sitting in the garage on Saturday evening, staring at a qualifying result that puts you 5th and 6th on the grid. Knowing full well that the Mercedes power units down the straight have just outdragged you by a margin that feels insurmountable over a single lap. That is exactly where Lewis Hamilton found himself before the Dutch Grand Prix. Yet instead of despair, his pre-race assessment was remarkably specific and optimistic about what Sunday would bring. He acknowledged the qualifying deficit was real, calling it nuts that all the Mercedes-powered cars were ahead, but he immediately pivoted to separate that one-lap reality from the race pace equation. His exact words were that Ferrari knew they had a bit of a deficit on power, but he believed their race pace should be better and the car was better suited for the long haul. This wasn't generic driver optimism. It was a technical distinction between peak power delivery and sustainable tire management that set the entire strategic framework for the afternoon. Qualifying P5 ahead of Leclerc in P6 gave him the track position necessary to validate that theory, but only if the team could translate that starting spot into clean air once the fuel burned off. The setup changes made overnight had reportedly transformed the SF26 into a completely different machine for him, flipping the car on its head in a way that specifically addressed his driving preferences. When a 7-time world champion tells you the car has been fundamentally improved for race trim and then qualifies ahead of his teammate while predicting superior long-run performance, you have to take that as the baseline truth for what followed. He wasn't expecting to magically find top speed he didn't have. He was banking on degradation management and chassis balance to do the heavy lifting that the power unit couldn't. That belief system is why his frustration later in the race was so palpable, because the pace he had predicted wasn't missing due to sandbagging or hidden maps, it was being squandered by operational delays that had nothing to do with engine modes. The numbers from Saturday tell only half the story, because qualifying at Zandvoort is always a compromise between low fuel grip and high fuel stability. Hamilton's confidence stemmed from practice data showing the Ferrari could maintain consistent lap times on older rubber, while the Mercedes-powered cars tended to fall off more sharply. That is the kind of insight that doesn't show up in a headline but dictates every strategic call made on pit wall. He knew the deficit was real but temporary, solvable through patience and execution rather than brute force. So, when we talk about whether telemetry proves sandbagging, we have to measure it against this explicit pre-race benchmark. Hamilton expected to close the gap through racecraft and tire preservation, not through secret engine settings. The fact that he qualified P5 and still believed P3 was achievable means the car had genuine underlying pace that simply never got the chance to express itself cleanly. Setup worked, qualifying delivered, race unraveled. And that unraveling had everything to do with human decision-making under pressure and absolutely nothing to do with Selector 10J or any other fabricated technical conspiracy. Remember how this all started, with the blunt fact that zero telemetry data exists to support sandbagging claims, yet Hamilton still finished 16. 7.55 seconds behind Norris despite having the pace to fight for more? That opening statistic only makes sense when you examine the precise moment on lap 42 when the race actually broke down, not because of hidden engine maps, but because of a direct radio transmission where Hamilton stated clearly, "I'm quicker than Charles. My tires are better." This was the exact juncture where Ferrari's intention to maximize his result collided catastrophically with execution failure. As Leclerc initially ignored the subsequent team order to pit and held track position for at least one extra lap while his crew stood waiting in the pit lane. Order given, instruction ignored, time lost. That single lap of hesitation is what transformed a manageable strategic window into an unrecoverable deficit, completely independent of any power unit settings or selector positions. Hamilton wasn't asking for permission to drive faster, he was reporting a verified performance delta that the team had already acknowledged by preparing Leclerc's pit box. The fact that the swap didn't happen immediately proves this was a communication breakdown under pressure, not a premeditated plan to suppress pace. If Ferrari were truly sandbagging, they would have used that radio message as justification to keep Hamilton bottled up behind his teammate to preserve tire life or manage gaps. Instead, they tried to act on it, which confirms the competitive intent even as the operational reality fell apart. The telemetry conspiracy theories require you to believe the team was simultaneously ordering a driver swap while secretly limiting performance, a logical contradiction that no amount of speculative analysis can resolve. What makes this moment so critical is that it occurred precisely when Hamilton's predicted race pace advantage should have been most exploitable. He had spent the first 40 laps managing his tires exactly as planned, building the delta he needed to attack the Mercedes-powered cars ahead. When he finally had the grip and the pace to capitalize, the mechanism designed to unleash him failed at the worst possible instant. That 3-4 second stationary time during Leclerc's eventual stop wasn't just a slow pit stop, it was the physical manifestation of a strategy collapsing in real time. No ECU mode could have caused that delay. No secret software setting could explain why a driver holds position against direct instructions when his teammate has fresher rubber and superior pace. This was human error compounding under championship pressure, creating a gap that no amount of late race virtual safety car luck could fully erase. And yet, even as we identify this specific operational failure as the true culprit, the deeper question of whether Ferrari's raw Sunday pace could have genuinely matched Mercedes in a clean air scenario remains unverified by any public sector data, leaving us with a frustratingly incomplete picture of what might have been.